Hello there, my name's Cademan David. Sometimes I go by Mr. Cow. Welcome to my ECCENTRIC Academy, and welcome to our class where we go through every episode of Doctor Who and break them down, talking about the philosophical elements as well as the writing elements, things that we like and we don't like. Today we're taking a look at the episode called The Lodger. The Lodger by no means is one of my favorite episodes of Doctor Who. In fact, I would probably put it pretty low at the bottom of the list. It's no Love and Monsters, but it is a difficult watch for me. I don't particularly like it. With that being said, let's jump right into it. This episode is one of those infamous filler episodes. Now, although filler episodes sometimes get a bad rap, I sort of miss filler episodes in modern TV. Sometimes they did great character work in between big stories. Is this one of those times? I would say probably not. I don't think this episode really does anything good for the character of the Doctor. Besides that he makes a couple friends, which is pretty cool. But honestly, I think putting a sort of filler episode right here before the final finale of the season is actually a really good idea. However, this particular episode, like I said before, not one of my favorites. The interactions between the characters Craig and Sophie are supposed to be comedical, but they just make me very uncomfortable. Now, of course, you may find their interactions humorous or relatable, and that's completely fine. There's nothing wrong with that. That's just not how I felt during this episode. I felt like, oh, this is uncomfortable, and I don't want to be watching it right now. I feel like in a lot of ways this episode embodies a lot of the problems I have with Matt Smith's Doctor. A lot of the humor just didn't hit for me, though there was a good amount that I did actually like as well. This is the sort of socially awkward Doctor at his peak, which, there's certain moments of socially awkward Doctor I can get behind. For example, the Doctor showing up in the beginning and not knowing if he gave Craig a lot of money or not very much money. That makes a lot of sense for the character of the Doctor, who famously doesn't carry any sort of money on him. It makes sense that he would be just sort of impulsive and just have a big old amount of money and just be like, there you go, maybe I gave you too much, I don't even know. There's also fun scenes of the Doctor cooking, which I just love the idea that the Doctor cooks. There's so many moments in this episode of the Doctor just sort of making Craig's life miserable for comedic effect. And, I get it. It's this sort of sense of humor that they have with this Doctor, and the idea is that he doesn't fully understand humanity. But this Doctor has spent a lot of time with humanity. It doesn't make sense for now all of a sudden him to have this sort of social awkwardness. Though, unfortunately, for better or for worse, that sort of element of the character has sort of stuck beyond this episode and even beyond this generation of the Doctor. So that's my sort of overall views on this episode. There was a number of jokes I liked, there was a number of jokes I did not like. Overall, this is just one of those episodes that isn't gonna be for me because it's too humorous. But not just the fact that it's too humorous, it's just not my style of comedy, not my cup of tea. With that being said, let's go ahead and move on to sort of my plot breakdown. By the way, Mountain Dew, drink of this video. You don't know because I often cut it out. But basically, anytime I'm filming a video, I am drinking a beverage of one sort or the other. And right now it's Mountain Dew. Okay, so this episode starts. There's some timey-wimey stuff going on. The TARDIS appears, not where the Doctor wants the TARDIS to appear, which, honestly, that sort of plot device of, like, the TARDIS just sort of deciding to go wherever, I kind of don't like it. But yeah, sometimes it just seems like there could be more creative storytelling than just, oh, and the TARDIS just decided to appear in this place. Yeah, it's ultimately, I just feel like a lot of times people just fall back on that, and there could be more interesting story being told that isn't being told because of that. But with that being said, the TARDIS appears, there seems to be some sort of a timey explosion that pushes the Doctor out of the TARDIS before it disappears. Now, a quick shout out to Matt Smith's acting, because he really sells that he's a little worried for Amy in this part. Then we get a very cool scene of someone being led into this house by a voice asking for help. That scene is very cool. I always say that Doctor Who works the best when it's a little bit scary. And this scene sort of encapsulates that a little bit scary very well. Then we're introduced to Sophie and Craig, which I already talked about how, to me, their interactions just feel awkward and uncomfortable. I don't enjoy watching them. Sophie leaves. She leaves behind her keys. Craig goes to take her keys, while also working up to professing his love for her. However, when he finally gets to the door, instead of Sophie on the other side, it's the Doctor on the other side, saying that he's there to be Craig's new roommate. Now, Craig's interactions with the Doctor, some of them are pretty fun, and that's sort of the biggest redeeming part of this episode, I think, is you can just sort of buy that Craig and the Doctor sort of get along with each other. I'm particularly fond of the part where the Doctor says he can tell that Craig doesn't travel much because of his sofa. And then when Craig asks, my sofa, what does that mean? The Doctor says, because you're starting to look like it. And it was delightful to see that Craig actually thought that that was funny as well as me. Because I think all too often in modern shows, whenever someone makes a joke about someone's weight or disability or whatever, whenever it's brought up, it's like, oh, you shouldn't talk about that, or I'm offended by what you said in injustice. And it's like, I get it, there's bullying, but also when you're willing to be humorous about some of the things that people will bully you for, then you can't really be bullied. And I think it's good to teach kids to have a good sense of humor about their weight or disabilities. Like I was saying, I think it's those scenes just of Craig and the Doctor hanging out that sort of worked in this episode. But with that being said, the story goes on. There's a soccer game. They call it football because they're weirdos. We get a lot of the Doctor being socially awkward and making stuff uncomfortable for everyone, and making stuff very uncomfortable for Craig. There's a splotch of mold that's been leaking down from the upstairs that Craig touches. It poisons him. The Doctor makes a cure for him out of random stuff just lying around. Also, he pulled something out of the trash, which gross. But then he goes to work for Craig. I don't buy that. I don't know how that works. If someone just showed up at my job and they were like, oh yeah, I'm here just on behalf of Cademan, that wouldn't go over well. So, I don't know how things go in call centers. I've never worked at one. But my guess is this does not reflect reality. It also does get sort of annoying in this episode how everyone automatically just falls in love with the Doctor besides Craig. Now anyway, it turns out what's gone wrong with the TARDIS and keeping it from rematerializing, because there's a time machine being built, I believe, on the upstairs of the flat. it's either being built or it's just there, but they're trying to find a pilot for it, and then somehow, because of reasons, everything is saved when Craig professes his love to Sophie, and then they kiss. So that's sort of the synopsis there. Of course, go and watch the episode for yourself. There's stuff I left out. But with that being said, we're going to move on to my likes and dislikes of this episode. Alright, so let's jump right into just random things I liked and didn't like. I'll be assigning points for things. That's what we're doing here. That's what this is all about. So we'll start with actually the things I didn't like. In this one, there's more things I didn't like than usual. However, there's still much more things I wanted to bring up that I do like. So the first thing I have written down for being something I didn't like is just Craig and Sophie. I've said time and time again in this video, I just didn't connect with them. They felt just uncomfortable to watch. Also, the football match, I guess the Doctor just feels like he's at his most Mary Sue-ness in this episode. And that's embodied here at the football game, but then also when he goes to work for Craig, both of which I have on here as negative points for. And of course, after the soccer game, you have the guy saying, "Oh, let's annihilate the other team." And the Doctor says, "No annihilation." Again, this is what I'm talking about. The Doctor is supposed to be smart, but this just makes him too socially awkward. I get it's supposed to be funny, it's just not my sense of humor, I guess. Now, there's a conversation between Amy and the Doctor, and Amy says, "Just go upstairs." And the Doctor's like, No, I can't." That seems very out of character for the Doctor. I think they could have come up with a better reason for him to not go upstairs than just he decides not to for no reason. We've seen the Doctor act very impulsively time and time again throughout the show. However, right here they just throw away that sort of character element because the plot needs it to happen. So, -1 point for not going upstairs. And then talking to the cat, that's, it's just very silly. I don't like it when they say, "Oh, the Doctor can speak dinosaur and horse." It's too silly for me. But here it's a psychic link with the cat, so I can get behind it a little bit more. But also, what are the Doctor's powers? Because Stephen Moffat seems to be convinced that the Doctor has telepathic Spock powers, but it doesn't really come up a lot, and it's not well defined. I think that's sort of the point, is the Doctor can just do anything. He's like Superman, we're just introducing more and more powers for him. But I would prefer a set of powers that the Doctor has, instead of just being like, oh, he can do anything he wants. So anyway, those are all of my dislikes, and let's move on to my good likes. My likes. Yep. Okay, the creepy part in the beginning, the part where the guy is being called into the house and the lights flashing. I've said it time and time again, but Doctor Who works the best when it's a little bit scary. Now, this is sort of a subtle rewatch and you spot it moment, but in the very beginning there's a line where Craig says, "How lucky am I?" Something like that. The Doctor says, "More lucky than you know," but why I want to give this one a point is because as he says that, he is looking up at the upstairs of the house.
Well, aren't you lucky I came along? More lucky than you know.
Little subtle details like that I quite like. You can really only spot it in the rewatch. Now, I thought the rot was cool. I sort of like when Doctor Who will put in these little details of something that's familiar in our world, but now it's science fiction and scary. I, of course, wish they would have explained it more, which I'll talk about in the next portion of the video, but I thought it was cool enough. Now, I'm going to add 2 points for the Doctor cooking. I think the Doctor can cook, you know? That makes sense to me. I would think he can play football, or soccer as we call it in America, but I think he can cook. There's a moment in this where where Greg says he doesn't like to travel, and then the Doctor says, I can tell by your sofa. Then he's like, what? My sofa? What are you talking about? He's like, you're starting to look like it. Now, what I like about this moment is that Craig thinks it's funny. I appreciate in this episode Greg just being amused by the Doctor's little "you look like a sofa." I'm going to give 2 points for Craig telling the Doctor that he's weird, particularly in the Matt Smith era. I think more people should tell the Doctor he's weird, because he's weird, right? And a lot of people just like instantly fall in love with him, and it's awkward and doesn't really make sense. But Craig says you're weird, and I like that. I also wanted to add a point for the Doctor singing in the shower, mainly just because it reminded me of John Pertwee. I don't know if there's a scene of John Pertwee singing in the shower, but just something about it was like, I feel like that's something he would do. In fact, I'll bump that up to 2 points. I feel like the Doctor sings in the shower. He cooks and sings in the shower, but doesn't play football or soccer football. There's a gag where the Doctor uses Craig's toothbrush as the sonic screwdriver, which I thought was kind of funny. On rewatch, I realized that like he goes to grab his sonic screwdriver, but accidentally grabs the toothbrush, which doesn't actually make sense, because earlier he says I can't use the sonic screwdriver right now because whatever's upstairs will know I'm here or something. But anyway, I thought the gag of him using the toothbrush as a sonic screwdriver was kind of funny. So I'll give a point to that one. Now next I want to give a point to the only redeeming part of Craig and Sophie's dialogue together, and that's the scene where Matt Smith's face, just when he's looking at them going back and forth. I'll put it up there so you can see, but it's delightful. It made me laugh. I liked it. So I'm going to give a point for that one. And a half point to the Doctor talking to Sophie, and he's saying, oh, you have 2 keys to someone else's house? You must like it here too. I kind of like that. That was sort of cute of the Doctor, where the Doctor's like, I like it here with Craig. I thought that was a nice little element, and he's like, oh, you must like it here with Craig too. That's, I don't know, I just thought it was a little bit of like sometimes the Doctor's a little bit of a 5-year-old, and this is a moment where he was a little bit of a 5-year-old, and it actually worked. I also like the element where, unlike the last element I said, where it's like the Doctor's a 5-year-old and it works, he seemed like an old man when he says, what's keeping you here? But like just the way Matt Smith delivered it, it was like an old grandpa like giving off some wisdom. So I really liked that. I also like the fact that the Doctor brings Greg breakfast in bed. Again, I kind of feel like it's like, the little brother who like just loves you so much. He's like, I like it here. I'm gonna make you breakfast in bed. It's gonna be great. And then that's gonna go right on to my next thing, where it's sort of the same thing, but it's after Greg touched the rot. Sorry, after Craig touched the rot. I keep calling him Greg. But he says, I need to go work, it's important. And then the Doctor says, no, you're important. And it was some nice bedside manner, from the Doctor. It was also just a really sweet moment. So, anyway, with that being said, let's jump right on to how I would have written this episode differently. Yay! So what would I do differently if I was writing this episode? Well, I think one thing is I would start by sort of explaining how the TARDIS is getting messed up and going a little wonky like before the Doctor gets launched out of the TARDIS. I would have liked it if they would have gone into more detail about what was the time machine. What was the time machine that disguised itself as the second story of this house? It seemed like it was TARDIS-esque, but it was a little counterfeit TARDIS-y. And that would be a very interesting sort of concept to lean into, where it's like maybe some group tried to make a TARDIS after the Time Lord's TARDIS is, but they didn't realize that it would get out of hand and something bad would happen. I would love to see more time spent on what is this time machine and why is it there, as well as what exactly is the mold that ended up poisoning Craig. You know, it's just these little background details that I really feel is lacking in a bit of the... You know, it's just sort of these background details that I really feel is missing in a lot of the Matt Smith era of the show. But I would love to see more of that in this episode here. Also, I think I would sort of shift away from comedy and try and more focus on the depth of relationships. You know, sort of lean a little more into the love-hate relationship between the Doctor and Craig. Just little stuff like that. Okay, so here's my pitch. The camera opens up on the TARDIS interior. The core of the TARDIS is shaking, and the Doctor and Amy are being thrown from one side of the TARDIS to the other, while its core rumbles out into the rest of the room. Amy says, "What's going on?" The Doctor says, "I don't know," as he rushes over to the center console. He begins flipping switches, but then after a while, he becomes very serious. Amy asks, "Well, what is it?" The Doctor says the TARDIS has picked up a time buffer and has gotten stuck. Amy looks at the Doctor confused. And what does that mean? The Doctor says it could mean the end of time itself. But the Doctor says it gets worse than that. Amy asks, how could it be worse than time itself? The Doctor shakes his head and saying whatever is causing the time buffer seems to be Time Lord technology. At that moment, the TARDIS is turned on its side, and we see Amy hanging on to the railing of the TARDIS, but the Doctor falls out the door. Now, from there, the story sort of proceeds as the original episode, except this time when the Doctor is talking to Amy, he says that he doesn't want to go upstairs because whatever is upstairs knows about the Time Lords. You could even throw in a line where Amy asks, well, if it's Time Lord technology, doesn't that mean it's a good thing? Doesn't that mean that you're not the last Time Lord? And the Doctor could reply by saying, I would know if there were more Time Lords. I would feel it in my head, which is something that Tennant's Doctor also said. Now, the other change that we sort of make to the center of this episode is that we have the Doctor refer to the rot as coming from toxic time slush. Something like that. We have him say what the goo is that explains it a little bit more. Now, in this version, instead of just focusing on the romance between Craig and Sophie, what we focus on is the Doctor helping them to get outside their comfort zone. But with that being said, eventually we come to sort of the climax of the episode. Sophie goes upstairs, the Doctor and Craig realize, they follow her upstairs where the Doctor sees a TARDIS-esque interior, something like a counterfeit TARDIS. And he sees a pile of skeletons. We have Craig ask, what happened to their skin? We have the Doctor reply by saying, You remember that toxic time sludge that was dripping down through the roof? And we see a disturbed look on Craig's face as he realizes what that time sludge was. At that moment, the hologram appears, and the doctor says, "What are you?" The hologram says that he was part of a crew that was set on recreating a Time Lord's TARDIS. However, due to time leaks in the core of the counterfeit TARDIS, anyone who tried to fly it was reduced down to a skeleton in time sludge. So now the hologram is doing his duty to try and find a pilot strong enough to fly the TARDIS. Eventually, the hologram ends up realizing that the doctor is likely able to fly the counterfeit TARDIS. So we see him with his hands on the center console as we see cracks go up through his skin with that time energy leaking out of his body. We then see the doctor being a little scared, afraid he's gonna regenerate. This could maybe even be a time when we bring up that the doctor doesn't have a regeneration left, because he's on number 12. But then we have Sophie put her hand on the panel, saying, "If your body can't take the time energy, maybe I can help." We then have the doctor snap at her, saying that she's gonna die. Then we have Greg place his hand on the panel, saying that he wants Sophie to remove her hand and get away. Sophie asks why he would do that for her, and he says because he loves her. The doctor says, "Wait a minute, that's it. If all three of us are here on the panel, then we can divert the time energy back into the core, destroying the time buffer as well as the counterfeit TARDIS." They do so and are able to get out last moment as they see the counterfeit TARDIS revert from the upstairs into an actual counterfeit TARDIS. The doctor says that it was disguised as the upstairs because of a chameleon circuit, not a perception filter. I don't know why they got that wrong in the actual episode. In this episode, a perception filter works as a chameleon circuit. So we just fixed that. We fixed that little mistake they made. Then we see Amy saying that the TARDIS is able to get a lock on the doctor's location, and we see the TARDIS crash down into the ground near Greg, Sophie, and the doctor, and that's where we end the episode. That's something like what I would do differently. But with that being said, it's time to move right on to the moral of the story. Would you believe that I was just talking to a non-recording camera for a little while? I filmed the entire end of this video and then realized I was talking to a camera that wasn't recording. Enough of that, that's not important. So, what is important is the moral of this episode, the takeaway for all of us. And I actually have two morals for this episode. One is it comes from Craig and Sophie, and it's just sort of that you shouldn't try and hide your feelings. It's better for people to know sort of where you're at and how you feel. You know, this implication, it's about like, you know, romantic attraction. It's like, and like that sort of thing, which I think, you know, you're better off not trying to hide, generally speaking. But also like that can go for a lot of things, whether you're like uncomfortable with something or whatever. You should just talk about it. You shouldn't try and hide it. You shouldn't be like, oh, I don't know how to say this. Sometimes that's easier said than done, whatever. It is a whole thing. But that's sort of my takeaway from them. And my second takeaway is from the doctor, and that is that you can be weird and people will still like you. You shouldn't try and pretend you're something you're not, because if you're able to just be your weird self, some people will like you, some people won't. Unless you're the doctor, in which case everyone will like you. Do you like how I dislike this episode so much that even when I'm going through the moral, I'm bringing up the things I don't like about the episode? But in all seriousness, yeah, that's there's something valuable about just knowing that you can be you, and it doesn't really matter what other people think. Within reason, of course. With that being said, class dismissed. Don't forget to brush your teeth. More Doctor Who reviews, and let's put some Star Wars reviews right up there. So if you like Doctor Who or Star Wars, you can click on either of those playlists. I hope you enjoy them. You look handsome. Class dismissed. Goodbye.